Hey everyone, and welcome to Deadlock Intel, your #1 source for all things Deadlock, Valve's newest 6v6 shooter. Make sure to subscribe for Deadlock updates, gameplay videos, breakdowns, streamer stories, and more. Today we're running through the most recent patch notes. Let's get into it. Per usual, there is a lot to cover because there are a lot of changes happening week to week in this game. Remember, this is still pre-release, invite only, so the devs are making a lot of different balance changes and changing a lot of different items, heroes, you name it. I'm going to be as in-depth as I can, but I'm also going to list the link to the patch notes below in the description so you can read everything that I miss. For general changes, we're starting off with a bang. Matchmaking is now open 24/7 for all regions. If there were no other changes in this patch, I would be happy. This is great news for everyone who just wants to play, wasn't able to during the open times. The minimap has now been changed as well. The base asset was updated and new unique hero icons were added. I like to think that some of these are giving us insight to maybe what the redesigns look like in the future. Neutral camps are now represented by a highlight glow on the buildings that they are located within, and the orange lane is now the green lane. There was some stuff changed about the inner lanes as well as the main base. For the inner lane, there was added connections from the shop, the front of the department store, and the New York Oracle buildings. A new veil was added to the opening at the front looking out towards the opposing side, and a cover barrier was added in front of the opening with the veil. The catwalk stair was now moved in front of the department store and New York Oracle closer to mid. As far as the base goes, they've now angled the walkway connection from the outer lane exits to the inner lane exits. They added an overhang that is below the patron's position, and they added 2 juke closets facing the patron. I personally like the juke closets position. Whether you're attacking or defending inside the base, I think this can have some fun to it. Also, another one of the top changes for me is that they added a new behavior system to the game as well as a low priority queue. Low priority queue means that if you are someone who is abandoning games often, you will be punished. Once you are in this low priority queue, you have to complete the required amount of games to be able to return to using matchmaking normally. Players can also now temporarily lose access to different capabilities, whether that is matchmaking, voice chat, text chat, pausing, and reporting. This happens when players report you for doing different things, and yes, they do manually review the results as of right now. Misreporting players will also result in you losing the reporting function and may sometimes cause you to go into low priority queue as well. They made some matchmaking changes as well, where new players that are queued solo are only going to match with other new players until they get 4 wins. That's an awesome change because a lot of players were complaining about getting into matches with much better people because a lot of the player base has been playing for a while now. 6 stacks will now take longer to queue, so if you're queuing with 5 other people, 6 people total, you will no longer match against solo players. AFK players will automatically be kicked after a few minutes, and abandoned match dialogue is now more clear about the consequences of leaving, so if you leave the game, you are going to be very aware of it. Speaking of being aware of it, they have also added time delay before you can click on abandoned match, just in case people were doing it by accident. A couple of fun visual updates. Bounce pads are no longer there. It is now wind fans. They work exactly the same way, but the wind effect indicates the travel path of the fan. There's also now these fun little frog legs on the bottom of the soul urn when you're carrying it. A really awesome change is that there are custom hotkeys per hero. You can now go change it depending on what hero you're playing, so maybe you have a certain setup that you like to use when you're playing Abrams, but a different one when you're playing Dynamo. They have now added sliders in the options for double tap alternate cast timing and press and hold alternate cast required time. Big news for people who are wanting private lobbies. There's currently a console command that allows players to create custom lobbies using their servers. They do note it has very temporary UI, and eventually there will be non-console ways to host custom lobbies. This is really big though for people who are wanting to run tournaments right now. Mid boss's low health roar, which you hear about halfway through previously, is now more distinct from the spawn sound. As far as orbs go, there are a couple of changes where sandbox or practice area is now displaying the time in milliseconds that you hit the orb after spawning. That means you can go and practice and see how fast you can hit these orbs. Speaking of orbs, orbs now favor the claimer rather than the denier when both are shooting it within a very narrow window of each other. Great change again in my opinion, as you would have players with shotguns like Abrams who didn't have to aim super well to hit these orbs, and it felt like the denier was always getting it. One of the flex slots have been moved from the first walker to now 2 walkers. That just adds a little bit more time for that flex slot to be unlocked because first walker was normally a really fast one and you could rush it pretty quickly. All ability and item cooldowns were increased by 6% globally, so cooldowns overall taking a little bit longer. Max respawn time now happens at 35 minutes rather than 40. That makes deaths more punishing earlier. Tier 4 items cost reduced from 6,300 to 6,200, making the best items in the game just slightly more within your reach. Shield regeneration time was reduced from 60 seconds to 50 seconds. Also not a massive change, but might help with some durability within lane. Wall jumps were added 2 weeks ago in the last update, and they've continued to update it just a little bit as the activation has been made more lenient, so you don't have to do it quite as quickly or as perfectly as you previously did, and the launch angle can now be steered a little bit more. Speaking of mid-boss, like we mentioned earlier, the warning now happens at 60% instead of 50%, with mid-boss being pretty easy to kill middle to late game with your full team or even sometimes solo. This is a good update because it gives you a little bit more of a warning ahead of time when you hear that the enemy team is going for mid-boss. Now let's get into the item changes. I decided this week to separate everything by nerfs and buffs. So we'll go through the weapon, vitality, and spirit items, and I'll tell you what got nerfed and what got buffed. I'll also put up the specific nerfs and buffs on the screen with all the details. Starting out with the weapon items. For nerfs, we had headshot booster, high velocity magazine, rapid rounds, active reload, berserker, melee charge, Fleetfoot, Warpstone, Heroic Aura, Hunter's Aura, and Crippling Headshot. Some of the most notable to me being melee charge, obviously being hit with a lot. I have to imagine this is partially because of characters like Abrams just mowing people down by punching them over and over again. Also notable to me being Warpstone with its range reduced just a little bit. As far as buffs go, we have Restorative Shot, Rapid Rounds, Hollow Point Round, Mystic Shot, Long Range, Soul Shredder Bullets, Fleetfoot, Burst Fire, Sharpshooter, Titanic Magazine, Alchemical Fire, Lucky Shot, Glass Cannon, Silencer, and Frenzy. As far as notable updates here, I'd like to think that the restorative shot changes are notable as you're seeing more healing given back to you from both heroes and troopers. Glass Cannon also had a big update with max stacks being increased from 5 to 7, giving you even more of a snowball. Silencer and Frenzy also getting stronger here with more damage and more duration. Going to vitality items, starting out with the nerfs, we have Melee Lifesteal, Health Nova, Divine Barrier, Rescue Beam, Life Strike, Phantom Strike, and Soul Rebirth. Melee Lifesteal again hitting Abrams just a little bit, chipping away at that punch only strategy along with Life Strike. Soul Rebirth no longer grants 20% weapon damage along with cooldown reduction being reduced, and we saw Rescue Beam take a hit with its heal being reduced and cast range also being reduced. As far as buffs go, we have Healing Right, Daring Spirit, Fortitude, Health Nova, Majestic Leap, Metal Skin, and Colossus. Majestic Leap, not a huge buff, but getting its cooldown reduced just a couple seconds is always helpful, and Colossus with a bigger radius and a 10-second cooldown reduction. As far as spirit items go, nerfs, we have Spirit Strike, Improved Burst, and Silence Cliff. Spirit Strike was hit the hardest here with its melee damage, debuff duration, Spirit Shield, and regen being reduced. As far as buffs go, Mystic Reach, Extra Spirit, Ammo Scavenger, Withering Whip, Slowing Hex, Quicksilver Reload, Surge of Power, Rapid Recharge, Improved Reach, Torment Pulse, and Echo Shard were all buffed. A ton of buffs in the spirit items. Withering Whip is great for haze mains out there as fire rate slow was increased from 30 to 40%. Slowing Hex is going to hit the enemies even faster. Quicksilver Reload also, again, haze is just getting stronger with all these items, but we see the damage increase from 50 to 65. Surge of Power now also grants a fire rate increase, and Torment Pulse making you just a little bit tankier. Now jumping right into the hero section, again, I'm going to separate these by nerfs and buffs. You're going to see some of the heroes in both of them because a lot of them got some nerfs and some buffs just to balance them in different ways. Starting off with nerfs, we have Abrams, who had his shoulder charge stun reduced from 1 second to 0.85 seconds, and his infernal resilience reduced. Bebop's nerfs were that uppercut no longer roots your hero during the cast time. There's now no longer an alternate cast mode to pierce through allies or enemies, and the hook range was reduced. As far as buffs go, his hyper beam now does splash damage around a 5-meter area the beam connects with. He can also now keep firing if he jumps, and his laser is already warmed up. For Dynamo, his Rejuvenating Aurora Tier 3 was reduced, Kinetic Pulse was reduced, and Quantum Entanglement's cooldown was increased. However, as far as a buff goes, his Rejuvenating Aurora no longer gets cancelled when stamina is used. For Grey Talon nerfs, Rain of Arrows weapon damage was reduced, Tier 2 weapon damage was also reduced, and Guided Owl's cooldown was increased. However, on the flip side of that, Grey Talon's bullet damage growth per boon was increased. Kelvin was hit with only nerfs this time as Arctic Beam's fire fire rate slow was reduced heavily from 80% to 40%. The movement slow was also reduced from 80% to 70%. And in my opinion, a great change, the objectives and rejuvenator are now frozen and invulnerable when under frozen shelter. His ult was kind of being abused in my opinion, where things like the rejuvenator, he would just throw his ult over it and there was no chance at all for any outplay. Infernus was just slightly nerfed as base health was reduced just a little bit, but buffed in that Flame Dash's slow resistance was increased from 30% to 50%. Basically, we're just turning Infernus into Singed at this point if you played League of Legends, where the general rule of thumb is don't chase Infernus. McGinnis was hit with a big mix of nerfs and buffs. I think overall probably favoring a buff, even though it seems like there's a lot of nerfs. The original base radius for Medicinal Spectre was reduced. Spectral Wall's minimum range was reduced. The duration was reduced. Heavy Barrage's minimum range was reduced. However, the biggest change here, which is a massive buff to support McGinnis, is that Medicinal Spectre's radius now grows with spirit power. This means that her heal gets very large. Mini Turret's bullet travel speed now is increased, and Heavy Barrage's spirit scaling was increased as well. This makes her 4 even more powerful. Pocket only saw nerfs as the barrage amp per stack was reduced and barrage's slow was also reduced. Krill only saw a buff as you can cast Scorn now while using the combo. 7 was nerfed in a few ways as base bullet resist was reduced, making him a little less tanky right off the gate, as well as bullet resist no longer scaling. His old Stormcloud's damage was reduced, as well as the max radius being reduced. On the flip side, Stormcloud's cooldown was also cut down from 180 to 140. Shiv's Slice and Dice damage was reduced, Bloodletting's deferred damage cleared was also reduced, and Killing Blow's bonus damage from full rage was reduced. For buffs, Killing Blow's tier 2 now also increases rage amp by 5%. Vindicta was hit with a big mix of changes, whether it's nerfs or buffs. Me personally, I think it's more in the buff family. I think they're really trying to hone in exactly what role Vindicta plays. So as far as nerfs go, we see that base bullet damage was reduced, Stake's tier 1 duration was reduced, making it a little less oppressive right off the gate, and Crow, which was being spammed quite a lot, had impact damage reduced, spirit scaling reduced, and spirit power duration scaling. However, as far as buffs go, Assassinate bonus gold is now shared with the sisters. Maybe for Vindicta players themselves, that's not a buff, but the gold being shared with the sisters is great for your teammates. Crow Familiar now reduces bullet armor by 6%, making her much better at shredding tanks. You can now use stamina while flying to get an impulse in the facing direction, so giving you a little bit more movement while you're up in the air, as previously she was just a sitting duck. And a massive change, Assassinate now does 20% more damage when getting a headshot. Viscous is a hero that has face changes every single update. As far as nerfs go, Puddle Punch now telegraphs an effect before it forms. It was like instantaneously before, so it was almost impossible to dodge. Overall, a good change, but a nerf nonetheless. Base bullet damage was reduced, splatter damage was reduced, and Puddle Punch no longer pierces unstoppable. Viscous was super difficult to lane against early on because of how much damage just put out constantly, so I like the fact that this is being tuned down just a little bit. As far as buffs go, Puddle Punch now correctly knocks people in the cube up in the air. There were some issues there. Blue Ball's turn rate was improved, and the stun frequency cooldown was improved from 1.5 to 1.25. Warden's nerfs had bullet growth reduced, Alchemical Flask debuff duration reduced, and its radius reduced. However, a nice buff as Warden, you gain 50% bullet resistance during your 2-second ult channel. Again, another sitting duck, when you were activating that, you would just get piled on. So I think making him a little bit tankier during this 2 seconds is a great change. For Wraith, just one nerf as the Cardtrick's damage was reduced, and a couple small buffs as Cardtrick's spirit scaling was increased, and something that's really just a change, but they updated where the card projectiles spawn. Yamato getting a good few nerfs as Shadow Transformation's bullet and spirit resistance was reduced. Power Slash can now be interrupted with a parry. Power Slash's damage was reduced, and a grapple's post cast duration was reduced. However, an interesting buff for Yamato as ammo now scales with spirit power. And those are all the changes we have today for these patch notes, guys. Thank you so much for tuning in. Let me know what you would like to see in future patch notes updates, and I'll do my best to change those things. This is Deadlock Intel. I'll catch you later.